I don't know how long 7 months seems to you. Everyone's a little bit different in terms of their perspective on time, but think of it this way: less than 7 months to USC football. And of course, we will keep you company up until opening kickoff in August. So, 1 week earlier than most college football fans for the Trojans, of course. Welcome into USC Live right here at the Voice of College Football on a Monday night, 11 Eastern, 8 p.m. where it counts with, of course, Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. I'm not doing quite as well as USC's Juju Smith-Schuster, but I'm doing well.
That's right. We will congratulate Mr. Smith Schuster on a Super Bowl championship that went right down to the wire, of course. A controversial call there in the final seconds set up the game winning field goal. And more so than that, did it set up the field goal? Did it set up the timing of the conclusion of the game, in which, depending on your perspective, robbed many of at least watching Jalen Hurts and the Eagles have a legitimate chance of trying to tie or win the game? Do you have any thoughts about the final holding call on the pass play to the corner?
Yeah, so it's a slow week for USC football. I mean, we don't have to go deep into the weeds every week. Like the Super Bowl is what everyone's talking about, what football fans are talking about. So let's kick that around. There is something to learn here. People might say, well, it's just inconsistent officiating. What else is new? And we can just throw our hands up and say, what are we going to do about this? But there are a few things that I've thought for a long time about football. I'd like to get your opinions, Mark, on this. But for people watching here on the Voice of College Football, like there is something in my mind that we can learn in terms of reforming how calls are adjudicated, how replay is done to make football a better officiated game with more consistency, because this is a thing across not just all sports, but all forms of football. At the high school level, at the pro level, at the college level, you will get different interpretations on various kinds of rules, and people will say, you can't ever achieve consistency. Well, I'm here to say I think you can, and it starts with the rule book. All right. I think the way rule books are written, not just in football, but across all sports, that is really the key. That's what we need to unlock here in terms of getting consistency of calls, so that you won't get into situations where one kind of call is made in the first 58 minutes of a football game, and then a different kind of call is made in the last two, which has happened in each of the last two Super Bowls. It wasn't just this one. It was last year with Rams Bengals. They were letting them play in the first 58, called it very tight in the final two. And again, so people will say, oh, you can't solve that. It's just, it's a referee, it's a human being under pressure. I think if you write the rule book differently, and more precisely, if you write the rule book in a very simple way, such that you can't finally parse the interpretations of rules, it's not so legalistic, it's simple. All right, if you write the rule book in a simple way without 15 million caveats and descriptors, such that an official, when he looks at the replay screen, or when a booth reviewer looks at the screen, well, he has to weave through this thicket of several different nuances. That's what holds up the replay process. And so this is the gateway, Mark. If you write the rule book simply, such that an official or a replay reviewer can very easily apply a rule in like 10 seconds. Like I can look at 2 or 3 camera angles, and in 10 seconds, I can make a judgment that's clean. All right. You not only get very clean replay review procedures, that'll take very little time. You will get under 30 seconds for a review, but you will also you won't have fighting about like surviving the ground, process of a catch, targeting. If you write the rule book simply, you open up a pathway to be able to review pretty much any call. And if you can review any call, you can then apply a consistent standard, because you can just say, does it meet the simple criterion or 2 simple criteria, plural? Yes. And so that is really the gateway. If you can review every play, but reviews just take 10 to 15 seconds, I think that's the new frontier in officiating in replay and getting consistency of calls. And this can be done in basketball as well, like where basketball really lags behind in terms of its own enforcement mechanism. I mean, this is a football show, but let's just illustrate the concept. Where basketball really falls short is, all right, they review an out of bounds play, whose hand or fingers did it go out of bounds off? And then you find when reviewing that out of bounds call, oh, a foul was committed. And they don't overturn the foul because it's just you're looking at the out of bounds play. Uh-oh. So you should be able to review everything about a play. All right. If you find other violations in the course of review, that should be subject to a decision. And so coming back to football, if you can just simplify the rule book and the decisions that football officials and replay reviewers have to make, that allows for 10-second reviews. As soon as you get enough camera angles, then you should be able to make a decision in 10, 15 seconds. And then if you can review everything in 10 to 15 seconds, kind of like tennis with, the Hawkeye, like they don't have lines people at the major tournaments anymore. They just have the instant call for site calls. That is the future in my mind. And we can get there. Like, I don't think this is brain surgery. I don't think this is splitting the atom. I think this is pretty reasonable to achieve. And so if people think, well, it's just human nature, you're never going to get consistency in officiating, I really do think you can do it differently. But it starts with making the rule book, as simple as, like in terms of, there were a few disputed catches in the Super Bowl yesterday. And whenever there's a disputed catch in the Super Bowl, I always tweet out Butch Johnson's touchdown for the Cowboys against the Broncos in Super Bowl 12 in 1978. And it was a lot like the Jabbar Gaffney catch for Florida against Tennessee in September of 2000. He had the ball in the end zone for like half a second, but he had it, all right? And many people will say, and I agree with this school of thought, if you have the ball for like 1/10 of a second, but you are firmly grasping the ball in the end zone, to me, that's a touchdown, all right? Because you are in there in the end zone. There's no other place to go. As soon as you have control, firm grasp of the ball, who says it has to last a full second or 2 seconds? If you have it firmly across the goal line, you've reached the plane of the goal line, that's it. It doesn't have to be long. And so Butch Johnson in 1978, Jabbar Gaffney for Florida in 2000, that's a catch. And if you go to YouTube and you look at the broadcast call of Pat Summerall and Tom Brookshire for CBS of that Butch Johnson play, neither one's disputing that it's a catch. All right. It was just accepted. And until Jabbar Gaffney, that was the turning point. That was like the BCAD moment in terms of how football as an organized sport and its officiating and its rule book litigated catches. That was the before and after moment. Before Jabbar Gaffney, people didn't question catches where the guy had the ball firmly for, half a second, quarter of a second. This was not questioned in football circles. And it was just so simple, right? It was just, did he have the ball? Yes. And if he got hit a half second later, okay, it's a fumble. And so people got upset. The powers that be in football got upset at allowing catches to be that instant or that quick in terms of possession, because it meant there were that many more fumbles, there were that many more changes of possessions. Some people felt it was just disruptive, and we need to make the standards for a catch harder. We need to raise the bar higher. But you see, what got lost in that particular effort, Mark, and everyone watching here at the Voice of College Football, is that you lost simplicity. It used to be just so very simple in terms of what possession was. Did he catch the ball? Yeah. That was it. That used to be the standard. And so let's get back to that. Let's get back to a culture of simplicity in terms of interpreting all of these plays. We do not need to make this like the tax code. All right. And so if we do that, we can really revolutionize how everything is done. We can get more calls reviewed, more calls right, more calls consistent without spending 10 years to review a million different plays, and it can really reform how we officiate football, pro and college.
I'm going to go with my quick take on last night's call and then broaden it out to the overall issue. And so my take on last night's call is that, to me, technically, that was the correct call to make. I think that from a practical sense, in looking at the rule book, that call can be made and it's a legitimate call and it was the correct call. The issue that I have is that same level of contact happens a dozen other times during the course of a game, and either that official makes a judgment not to call it, or they just don't see it. And obviously, any of the competitors in us, the portion of us that want to see the athletes on the field determine the game, if you know time and situation, you basically knew once that flag was thrown, the game's over. There's a 95% chance that this game's over as long as they can make a 25-yard field goal because of the time and situation, and as long as they can snap a ball and kneel and kick a field goal. And most of us, if you're not a Kansas City Chiefs fan, you would like to see the opportunity for the Eagles to get the ball with 45 seconds left with an opportunity to tie or win the game. And this is part of the rule book as well. I didn't necessarily think that the ball was catchable thrown near the sideline as far as it was in the end zone as well. So that's my thought there. I didn't think it was an egregiously bad call. I just was hoping that it would not have been called.
That's right. And Juju Smith-Schuster, to bring the USC player into this again, he got held. I mean, he was interfered with like in the second quarter on like a 3rd and 8 pass. He was making a little crossing route over the short middle of the field, and it wasn't called. And it was a modest grab at the waist from behind, pretty garden variety, hand getting in there a little bit early to steer him, and it wasn't called. And so if you're an Eagle defender, like you're saying, okay, all right, so we didn't call that. They're letting me play. They're letting us play as defensive backs. So in a high leverage situation, I'm going to get my hand in there because that's the expectation. It's not so much that the Eagle cornerback is saying, oh, this is not a holding call. It's they're letting me do this. And again, you just want consistency. Like if that had been called earlier in the game, we're not talking about this. We're not having this conversation. But the fact that it wasn't called, and it gets back to the old thing about, if it's a foul in the first minute of a game, it's a foul in the last minute. But if it's not a foul in the first minute of the game, then it's not a foul in the last minute. So like that's the other thing. There can be inconsistencies in terms of how games are officiated, but once the template or once the standard is set by an officiating crew in any individual game, it is incumbent upon that officiating crew to maintain that standard. All right. So like we can have a tight whistle, we can have a loose whistle, but just if it starts one way, it needs to continue that way all the way through, not just most of it, but it needs to be there at the end. And that is what's been lost in the last few Super Bowls. And that is obviously a natural point of frustration for a lot of fans.
That Butch Johnson play from the 1978 Super Bowl, I think, bothers a lot of television producers to the point where, if you've noticed, sometimes when they're doing some of the great catches in the history of the Super Bowl or great plays, they'll actually show that play and they'll cut it from the moment that he catches the ball and will not show the continuation of the play because it doesn't look good. But yeah, he if you haven't seen the play, go check out the play at some point.
Super Bowl 12, XII.
Yes. If you or I went out in the backyard and started playing catch, we would know at what point somebody didn't catch a throw. If we were throwing a football back and forth, we would know, to your earlier point, we would be able to distinguish, okay, Mark dropped that throw. He didn't catch that one. Oh, he caught all the other ones. He didn't catch that one.
That's right. So like we should be able to write the rule book in football in terms of what a catch is in one sentence, maybe 2 sentences maximum. Like this does not need to be that complicated. Like it should be a layman's terms this is the other thing, and a lot of people mention this. Like, I'm not making an original observation here, but now the modern football fan has a big screen TV, and you have entertainment systems that enable fans to just rewind, fast forward, pause. The fan at home can see these plays and can freeze frame and screen grab images and put them on Twitter. We can all slice and dice these plays, and we can say, oh, well, that's obviously that. That's obviously the call, or he obviously caught it. He obviously didn't catch it. And that's really the annoying thing, is that we can all see these things just as average fans, people who love the sport, and yet there's still inconsistency of application. We shouldn't be there, but I'm going to die on this hill. It's because the rule book is so complicated, and because layers of complexity have been applied in the decades since Jabbar Gaffney. Again, that was the moment where, because Florida was, not really the old money school. It was Tennessee that was the old money school. And a lot of the old timers in the SEC and in the world of college football officiating, it rankled people. Like, that's kind of the underreported story behind all of this. It was that the call went against the old money power in that Florida-Tennessee game from September of 2000. And so just higher ups got upset, and they thought, oh, he has to catch the ball. He has to hold the ball longer for it to be a catch. And there was a definite shift in mentality among rule makers and rule overseers in the upper reaches of administration for officiating, that catches have to be held to a higher standard. And again, like, that militated against the simplicity that I'm talking about, which could really, I think, dramatically help the product of football by, making replay reviews 10-second, 15-second deals, which gives you the ability to review just about any play in a game.
Now, I've not given it the thought that you have to determine this is the direction I think in which we should go. What I believe has probably happened, Matt, is that through the years, there have been, there was a set standard and a description of any of these things, not just a catch, but holding, pass interference, holding in terms of both from an offensive line standpoint and a defensive back standpoint. And then there would be plays that would happen where the rules writers would look at it and think, oh, well, we didn't really address that, so let's write to address that particular, move or sequence, and try to cover that. And they tried to cover every possible detail that could ever happen. And it just becomes so convoluted. If anybody thinks that Devontae Smith didn't catch that ball in the first half, I don't know. That's the way I saw it. It looked to be a pretty clean catch. And now we've gone through this whole process of not just, are you inbounds or out of bounds, or did you receive the football, but, about the ball moving in the player's hands and when he hit the ground, and trying to evaluate that, for anybody out there that, wants to dive through NFL history or college football history. We went from the Butch Johnson play in 1978 being a catch to Calvin Johnson, and also the Des Bryant play against the Packers in the playoffs. It was a critical, you're talking a playoff game in the final minute. He did everything but, hand the ball to somebody in the front row at Lambeau Field. He caught the ball. He rolled on the ground. He was getting up, and then he lost it. And it's like, if that's not a catch, my goodness, it's just insane.
It's right. And so, like, these things have been litigated in terms of, can we account for the 89 different nuanced actions, movements, hypotheticals that can emerge during a play, instead of writing a simple code that can encompass those 89 hypotheticals. You can legislate from a standpoint of simplicity rather than complexity. And I think the happy medium is you can just mention several hypotheticals as case studies, because there's the rule book, and then there's obviously in every sports rule book, there is a set of case studies or applications, like in the appendix, or, like illustrating each rule nuance, like this happens what's the right call. Like they spell it out. It's having the simple code, and then you can just account for each hypothetical, so that it's addressed in the rule book. So like that's the way to make it easier for officials, is that if this happens, this is the call. If that happens, this is the call. So like an official can just look at, the application and go, all right, this is what happens. Like you have like 20 menu choices, like going to a fast food restaurant, you can just go through, oh, this is the number 12. and the official can just plug and play. That's also a quick way to adjudicate these situations. Like I think there are ways to get simplicity and consistency in football officiating.
We, of course, appreciate everybody being here at the Voice of College Football. Not a whole lot going on specifically with USC football, but of course, the most controversial play, possibly the most important play of the NFL season, of course, involved a USC player, Juju Smith-Schuster, who's got himself a Super Bowl ring. Also want to mention, as I did to Tony, or to Matt, I'm sorry, Tony, of course, Matt, Rick, and others, and Tim were on our Pac-12 show earlier tonight. Go on over. Actually, you can catch that. We posted that as well right here on the USC channel as they dove into the latest concerning SMU, San Diego State to the Pac-12, and of course Arizona State making some rumblings and the power struggle within the Pac-12. But I was going to mention that I've got some videos that have posted both today and tomorrow on the main channel, projecting USC's record for the next 10 years in the Big Ten. I did a look at USC's performances against the Big Ten over the past 15 or 20 years. Also, how, of course, USC is recruited, how they've played against the Power Five, and then projected that win total in conference play and overall. And we'll do the same with UCLA, and that video will post here coming up tomorrow.
It's going to be interesting to see what the schedule rotations are. Like that's going to give us a real window into how USC does. And I think the other thing is, and let's highlight this comment here from Jessica Larson. Do you think USC and UCLA will have a Midwest campus to help ease travel issues and body stress? Well, Jessica, very interesting question. Good question. I don't know about campus, but I think one really interesting thing, Jessica, as you ask this question, is going to be, does the Big Ten schedule USC road games consecutively in the Eastern time zone? Because I don't think you want USC to fly back and forth, road game, home game, road game, home game. I think you're going to see USC play two Eastern time zone road games in consecutive weeks. Like you'll have USC play at Michigan State one week and then at Rutgers or Maryland the next. And I think that USC in between those games, in terms of playing two consecutive Eastern time zone road games, USC will be able to just have a home base between those two sites or between those 2 weeks. But like a fixed campus, not really. But like I think you will just see USC not fly back to Los Angeles. You'll just see USC be on the road for 2 straight weeks. Just getting used to the second game location, and you'll get like the academic support staff just being with the team for a 2-week period. And then you'll also see USC, I think, play at the Coliseum in consecutive weeks. And it's going to be really interesting to see what Mike Bone is able to negotiate, what USC really insists on in terms of the logistics of that schedule. I think that's going to be, Jessica, one of the things that the Big Ten and USC and UCLA need to agree on, that it's not going to be whipping back and forth each week. They should at least be 2-week blocks, if not 3. I'd say at least 2. You're going to play 2 games at a time in the Eastern time zone, maybe an Eastern time zone game and then a Central time zone game, and then 2 consecutive games in Los Angeles, so that you're not having just a whip around boomerang effect with flights. And I think that's going to be something to look for. Also in men's and women's basketball and various other sports as well. I think you're going to see clusters of road games, clusters of home games, so that it's not a super abundance of plane flights. That's going to be something to watch for.
Matt, the dynamic of the fan bases, the clash of the fan bases between, and I don't want to leave UCLA out of this, but we know what their place in history has been. And in recent history, they've been a pretty marginal program. They've got a ton of potential to do something different in the Big Ten, but it's the Pac-12 has been owned by USC. And even over the last 10 years, as I looked at it, today and posting this video. Of course, they've only won one Pac-12 championship, but regardless, because of the legacy that's been established, the Pac-12 was owned by USC. Well, the Big Ten's been owned by Ohio State and Michigan. And to see, we're already seeing clashes of the fan bases because, you know, there's a thought that, hey, USC is going to come in here. They've got a hotshot new coach who's proven some things in his first year. And of course, at Oklahoma, they've got some certain advantages in play. They certainly, during the Pete Carroll era, dominated the Big Ten when they would play in the Rose Bowl and in other matchups. Ohio State and Michigan, you know, for as much as those fan bases hate the other, and we're speaking in sports terms, of course, there's maybe a certain comfort level in knowing if they're not going to be the king of the Big Ten and own the Big Ten. Well, on that particular year, that you know, it still came down to the game, and the other one was the one who owns the Big Ten. But to see this USC come in from the West Coast, and it's just going to be fascinating to see who runs this conference on the field over the next, you know, 5, 10, 15 years and beyond.
It certainly will. And you know, that this is the frustrating thing. I mean, it's one of the frustrating things about USC losing the Pac-12 championship game to Utah. Because if USC had won, you know, because TCU lost to Kansas State, if USC beats Utah, Pac-12 championship game, what do we have? We have a USC Michigan Fiesta Bowl playoff semifinal. So we would have been able to have basically Rose Bowl East in Glendale instead of Pasadena in a playoff semifinal. That would have just been amazing. And I know a lot of the Michigan fans were, you know, really, you know, gearing up for that possibility. We would have had a grand old time here at the Voice of College Football. It didn't work out that way. So yeah, it's a pretty irresistible talking point with Lincoln Riley coming into the Big Ten, going up against Jim Harbaugh and going up against Ohio State. And I think the really big variable, you know, and you know, like, so USC still has one more year in the Pac-12. So we don't know what it's going to be like in 2024 when USC actually does make its way into the Big Ten. But like, we don't know if Ryan Day is going to be coaching Ohio State in 2024. And I think a lot of people on both sides of the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry will say, if Ryan Day loses a third straight game to Harbaugh, then there's going to be a rethink from Ohio State's point of view and also from Ryan Day's point of view. Is he going to go to the NFL? Is he going to kick those tires? You know, we're used to Jim Harbaugh NFL flirtations, but if Ryan Day loses a third straight game to Harbaugh and Michigan in 2023, the Ohio State coaching situation, it will definitely be up in the air. I'm not saying the change is definite, but it becomes a lot more possible. And so just imagine Lincoln Riley having more tenure at USC than Ohio State's coach in 2024. Like that scenario is in play. I'm not going to say it's likely, but it's in play. And so, you know, we will obviously we have to see how the 2023 season plays out. But you know, that game, the Ohio State Michigan game in 2023, it's in Ann Arbor. So you know, and Michigan backed up the talk, won consecutive games this past year. So like going into the season, you're probably thinking Michigan has the edge. I mean, like, not that that means a whole lot because we'll see how the season unfolds, and it could be that Ohio State will be in a much better position by the time we get to Thanksgiving weekend in November. But like right now, in you know, it's speculation season, it's scheduled comparison season, and so right now you probably give the edge to Michigan just as a natural inclination, not as any sort of lock or guarantee. And so, you know, if Michigan does beat Ryan Day a third straight time, wow, it's going to get very interesting in Columbus.
And for anybody outside of that rivalry, from a fan perspective, and especially on the Ohio State side, where in some ways it can be easily argued take it a little bit more seriously than even Michigan does, it seems ludicrous that a coach could be on the hot seat going uh, to college football playoffs and winning 11 games. But uh, you hear Ryan Day in his news conferences, he will verbalize that in kind of with a little angst that I understand what the deal is here. I've got to win every game. Like I heard him say that probably a handful of times this year. I understand 11-1 is not good enough here. like he knows. And so to Matt's point, whether Ohio State makes the decision or maybe Ryan Day, because he's a very accomplished coach and a bright young mind, will have other options to say, you know what, this is a bit much. This is just a bit ridiculous. I can go coach somewhere in the NFL or somewhere else in college and not quite have this pressure cooker of you have to win every game.
It's true. And, like Steve Spurrier was at the height of his powers at Florida in 2002. And like he was tired of the suffocating expectations. Like now it was the monster he built. So like in this case, this wasn't the monster Ryan Day built. This was what he inherited from Urban Meyer, who, also did great things at Florida. But like Steve Spurrier built the monster at Florida and he got tired of that. And the lure of the NFL was powerful for him. And I think in many ways, I think at the time, okay, yeah, the ball coach wants to see if he can drop the ball plays in the NFL. To that extent, like it was a cocky, egotistical coach, just wanting to see how he fit in the pros. But on another level, that decision always was mystifying in the sense that Spurrier was a college guy. Like he so relished beating Georgia, and he so relished needling
In
Tennessee.
Yeah.
And he was just so into those old grudges in the South. And so why would he go to the more buttoned down pro game? And here's a little story that I have about Spurrier. Like I didn't meet him, but like I was like just 50 feet away from him when the Redskins were at a Seattle hotel playing the Seahawks in 2002, 2003 when I lived in Seattle. And I could see him the 50 yards away or whatever, and he was miserable. Like you could tell the NFL had already beaten all the fun out of him. And that game, the Redskins won in Seattle. It was like 14-3, and they're just dumping the ball in the middle of the line because the Spurrier offense, the vision, it completely failed. And he was on the verge of losing the locker room. So he basically just had to run the ball so that his defense wouldn't commit a mutiny against him. It was like the politics of the NFL and just the larger realities of a pro locker room. It just snowballed, and you could just tell he was absolutely miserable. So, the idea that he would leave, his cherished Southern rivalries for the cold, business-like world of the NFL, that never really struck me as making sense. But with Ryan Day, I don't really get that same vibe. I don't think he's like he is a college guy. I think he, enjoyed being able to take the car keys from Urban Meyer, but now you can feel that the weight of this situation is crashing down on him. So much like Spurrier a couple of decades ago, I do get the sense that when Ryan Day gets an opportunity, he gets an invitation, he gets an opening to go to the NFL, I do think he's going to leave. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be after 2023. I am saying that if he loses to Harbaugh, that can kind of speed up, accelerate that thought process. But I would say like in 3 to 4 years, at some point in the next 3 to 4 years, he will scratch that NFL itch.
And just getting back to some of the comments that we see on a regular basis, these Ohio State and Michigan fans and Big Ten fans overall, but those two fan bases in particular, because of course they believe that there's going to be this war for control of the Big Ten, which is pretty logical to determine. In preparing for this show and looking for comments throughout the week that are posted to the channel, I saw a few people comment, as they have in in past months about, well, USC is going to have to play in the cold and they're not going to know what to do and wait till they have to face, you know, freezing temperatures and cold, rainy games and sleet and snow, and they're not going to know what to do. And again, like, we went through the scheduling format and what we anticipate going forward. Not that we know quite yet, but we have an idea of what the model could look like. And then, of course, knowing the UCLA game is going to be at the end of the year and so forth, and Notre Dame every other year, just these fans' expectations, like they're going to be sending USC to play a November slate in Rutgers, East Lansing, Ann Arbor, and Madison every November is just not the case. I just don't think, the first time USC has to face weather in the Big Ten, it's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun to watch. And so, but this is not going to be just something that they constantly have to run into.
Yeah, I mean, you'd think that they're going to play, one really cold weather game in early November before they play the UCLA game to close the season. Yeah, it's not as though they're going to be inundated with these really cold weather events. I think, the intrigue is going to be, if they play mid to late October games on the road, are they going to run into yucky weather? But like you accept that in November it's going to be a little colder, but like, yeah, it's not a large volume of games. And so, yeah, I do think it is overstated. One thing that LBC Trojan mentioned on the comments, get ready for a lot of 9 a.m. starts on Big Noon Saturday on Fox. Well, that's going to be for the marquee games. When in the schedule rotations, when they have Ohio State, USC going to Columbus, USC going to Ann Arbor, that's going to be the noon game. In terms of USC at Rutgers or USC Maryland, that's more likely LBC and other people who might be interested. That's likely to be the CBS game in the 3:30 window, because CBS is getting the number 3 game. NBC gets the number 2 game in the primetime slot, the 7:30 Eastern, 4:30 Pacific window. So the mid-level games are going to be CBS games. In mid-afternoon, the big noon games are going to be the top end ones. So, if like USC, this is interesting. Like if USC goes to Michigan State and Michigan in consecutive weeks. Let's say we have a hypothetical where USC plays each of the Michigan schools in consecutive weeks. Are both games going to be big noon? I doubt it. I would imagine that the Michigan game would be big noon and Michigan State would be probably CBS at 3:30. But, maybe Fox is going to milk that USC cash cow a little extra. It's, again, the logistics of Big Ten scheduling for USC football, they're going to be fascinating to watch. And in terms of what USC is able to achieve, one thing we've talked about in previous shows here at the Voice of College Football is, will USC insist on and get, and I'm not going to predict anything here, but just will USC insist on playing the Big Ten road games earlier in the season and then having the games in the Coliseum in November? And of course, Big Ten alumni can go out to sunny Southern California in November, leave their cold home locations. It'll kind of be like an extra Rose Bowl for them. What's the Big Ten's thought process, calculus going to be? What, if anything, is USC going to want? What, if anything, will USC get from the Big Ten? That USC now in the Big Ten, you're not going to have a 10:30 night game. You're not going to have that. It would just be self-defeating for the Big Ten to bring USC in and then stick USC late at night, because that's a Pac-12 thing. You're going to have the Big Ten keeping USC in more favorable, earlier Eastern time zone slots. UCLA might play more Big Ten night games, in the late window, rather than USC. But how this all is going to work, we don't know, and that's going to be a huge point of intrigue 1 year from now.
The average mid-October temperature in Columbus, Ohio is 66 degrees, and the average mid-November temperature in Columbus, Ohio is 53 degrees. So it's not the frozen tundra.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the
That
college
would be
season
December.
generally misses that. You know,
Yeah.
the last couple weeks of the season, we see some scattered, oh, wow, you know, winter's creeping in at a few places like Minneapolis and Madison, but it's been overplayed in regards to USC's move to the Big Ten. Again, I will be the first one that will be intrigued and fascinated to watching USC play with some snow flurries in the air. Absolutely, I'm on board for that, but we're not going to see it that often.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to do a little sales pitch here, folks, because we've got Matt here and we've done this 41 consecutive weeks. We took you through the entire off season, pretty much last year, leading into the season throughout a historic season for USC with Lincoln Riley on board, 11 wins and a Cotton Bowl, and probably bigger things to lie ahead starting here in 2023. So you want to be locked in here at the Voice of College Football. So please, let other people know, because Matt only has so much influence and reach out there. I only have so much reach and influence out there on social media. You folks all put together reach all sorts of people that we will never reach without your help. So let people know that we are here each and every Monday night at 8 Pacific time to talk USC football. And it's usually a hard grinding 60 minutes of all sorts of recruiting and analysis of the offense and the defense and Lincoln Riley's style and approach and all of that. Of course, this particular week, we lightened things up a little bit. We just came off of a Super Bowl involving a USC player, of course, deciding the outcome near the end of the ball game. But please support us here at the Voice of College Football. And it was posted earlier in the chat, of course, Matt's Twitter. Matt, of course, you want to follow him on Trojans Wire, of course, but also follow him on Twitter at Matt Zemek, and also the Trojans Wire Twitter handle as well. And for Matt's work on Trojans Wire. And of course, Matt's going to be very focused on college basketball, as he has been for quite some time here. But we still pull him in, rein him in, regardless of the situation, for football talk on Monday night. And we've got spring practice starting in about a month. So that will be quite interesting. And Matt and I will, of course, keep our ear to the ground to try to pick up as much during spring practice, and leading into spring practice, we'll preview the positions and give you an outlook on the way those spring battles should look. And we will take you on through.
Good question here from Gixxer Squid. Any unforeseen USC recruiting implications for the prospective Big Ten move? Hey, Gixxer, I think here's how the recruiting piece is evolving. I don't think the Big Ten, moving to the Big Ten, is going to have that much of an effect, because recruiting's more national anyway. Like that was the direction where USC had to go in terms of recruiting. You remember Pete Carroll got Dwayne Jarrett from New Jersey, got Joe McKnight from Louisiana. Like, Pete Carroll recruited well nationally, well outside California, to help USC become, a dynastic program. But like, this was always a thing that Lincoln Riley and his staff needed to do at USC, even before the Big Ten move. So like Caleb Williams, obviously a transfer, and he already had him at Oklahoma, but like Caleb Williams, whether USC's in the Big Ten or not, Caleb Williams is going to be a pipeline into the DMV for USC to get prospects there. The Big Ten obviously helps USC to increase a focus on the DMV, on New York with Rutgers, and other various markets. But like, this was already going in that direction with Caleb Williams, extending USC's reach into other markets. So the real key for USC recruiting, and also the transfer portal as well, and we've seen this pretty clearly in the recruiting cycle, where USC got just about everything it possibly could have wanted on offense and didn't on defense. Gee, I wonder why that is. And that is the Alex Grinch issue that's just lingering over this program like a big long shadow. And, can USC get more bodies in the next portal window in May? And can it close the sale on more 2024 prospects? I mean, linebacker room pretty well solidified. Like that's the position unit on defense where USC looks pretty solid. Maybe not perfect, but like the cupboard seems pretty well stocked. But defensive line, especially secondary to a degree, like Domani Jackson being healthy next year would be huge. You could expect a certain upgrade in the secondary, but the defensive line, definitely not there. You definitely don't have the bodies there. You definitely don't have, the too deep presence across that defensive line that you really need, because it was Tuli Tuipulotu and not much else last season. And so it's really more of an Alex Grinch thing than a Big Ten thing, Gixer, for USC recruiting.
Matt, do you have any thoughts about what that Alex Grinch performance is going to need to look like this next season for him to hang on to a job? It's got to be some combination of how well the team does overall, even though he only has a third of a slice in that to a certain extent, but also national ranks in regards to all the various defensive metrics. Of course, he's got a hand in recruiting, both in the transfer portal and in high school. Just what are your thoughts about, and you're, of course, just taking a shot here, but especially at this point of the season, but of what Alex Grinch needs to accomplish this year?
Yeah, so if you followed our shows the past year here at the Voice of College Football, and you followed our off-season discussions last summer, one of the themes I pounded home was, if this defense is regularly giving up 30 per game, 30 points per game, and, giving up 30, not in the sense of, you give up 10 one week and then 50 the next, but consistently giving up not much more than 30 per game, that would be fine. And I think that analysis generally held up well, because USC won some games 45-37 over Arizona, 41-35 over Cal. Like that offense was able to hit 40 points or more pretty consistently. And part of why the Tulane game rankled so many people around USC, and rightly so, I would add, like that, the fan base was right to be furious about that game and how it went down, is that the offense barely made a mistake. Like Caleb Williams threw one pick, and then there was that weird safety, basically just two really bad plays the whole game. Everything else was brilliant. Converted 13 of 15 third downs, controlled the ball. Time of possession was, I think 38 to 22, if I remember correctly, something in that range. And it still didn't hold up, and you still couldn't maintain a 15-point lead in the final 4.5 minutes. Like that should never, ever, ever happen. And the fact that it was Tulane as opposed to, let's say, Michigan or Ohio State, that added to the bad optics. But like, this could be the Kansas City Chiefs. You shouldn't have that kind of implosion the way USC's defense had. And so that's really the thing. So in 2023. I would maintain that if USC is giving up 30 points per game consistently, like you're not giving up 40, you're not giving up 45, you can regularly give up not much more than 30, let's say 35 tops, and you can just hit that benchmark consistently. This offense is so loaded, it's going to be getting to 40 points again on a regular basis. As long as Caleb Williams and the offensive line are healthy and they're upright, like USC's going to score at least 38, 40, 41, 42, 45 points per game. So in many ways, the challenge for Alex Grinch is just don't have an effing Tulane game again. Don't have a game where the offense does 98% of everything right and still loses. Don't have that. All right. If the offense has a game where it stumbles, leaves 17, 20 points on the field, and you get into a 38-35 game that doesn't go your way, kind of like what happened to the Eagles in the Super Bowl, all right, you live with that because the offense didn't make its share of plays. But, that Utah game, the 43-42 loss in Salt Lake City, and then the Tulane game as well, the offense just did so many things right, made so few mistakes. You're not going to play a perfect game pretty much any time. If the offense is close to perfect, that has to translate into a win. So it's less about the actual numbers. It's more about if the offense, grades out at a very high level and you still lose, you cannot have that. That's what you cannot have. So it's in many ways, it's the way games go. I mean, obviously wins and losses are a certain bottom line metric, but really, you're going to see some great offenses going up against USC. You're going to see Michael Penix in Washington under Kalen DeBoer coming back, and they've retained a lot of talent. Oregon has retained a lot of its offensive talent as well. You're going to have some shootouts, but it's going to be that nuance of if USC's offense does just about everything right and loses, you're out of here, Alex. That's really the benchmark. It's less about specific numbers. It's more about just do we waste Caleb Williams' final season at USC, or do we make good use of it? Because like if Caleb Williams plays at the same level he did last year and USC's results drop, then that would be a waste of a season, and really you can't squander Caleb Williams' second year at USC, and we'll all know what it looks like. Like we'll be able to get to the end of the 2023 season and make a pretty clear judgment, I would think, that was this season wasted for Caleb Williams? Was it used well? It doesn't necessarily mean that USC has to get to the playoff, because if you've been following our show here at the Voice of College Football, this schedule is nasty. The schedule layout is not conducive to easy breezy. If USC goes 10-2, gets to the Pac-12 title game, wins that, it could miss the playoff, but win the Pac-12 championship, and it would be a really good year against this schedule in year 2 with the defensive line still not fully developed. Like that could be a really good year. We'll see how it goes, obviously, when we get into the season. But so this isn't an automatic playoff or bust. That's the automatic expectation. No, we need to see how the season develops. We need to see how games develop to measure whether Caleb Williams' talents are being squandered or not, whether the offensive performances are being wasted or not. That is really the finer point to make about what is being expected of Alex Grinch this coming year.
14 games in 2022. Of course, the defense came through one time. That was in Corvallis and bailed out the offense. Otherwise, the offense won every game, and the defense did not get in the way most of the time. But of course, the Tulane game was just and the defense made turnovers against Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They also gave up a ton of yardage and got shredded most of that game, but they made the big plays in turning the ball over. Dorian Thompson certainly threw the ball to them and helped it out quite a bit. As our buddy Tim is letting everyone know again, Matt is crushing it at Trojans Wire. Check out his article talking about all the offense and no defense in Super Bowl 57. Sounds like something us Trojans saw this year. Connor Johnson in typical form here. Pac-12 is poised to be the best conference next year. Connor, give me a call, Connor, sometime. It's been a while since we chopped it up on conference supremacy, but we can have that discussion. But and certainly Matt and I have talked about our Pac-12 projections coming up for this year, and we'll dive deeper into how much we believe that this conference will factor into things coming up this year. Okay, Tim says, question, what does Matt think about the tweet by the USC athletic department naming Reggie as the second player of the 3 in history to win a Heisman, a national championship, and a Super Bowl?
One would think that in terms of USC's larger process of having a reunion, cementing the reunion with Reggie Bush, like welcoming him back into the fold, that there's going to be some specific honor given to him. So like what exactly that specific honor is going to be, I don't know the nuances of that, but like it certainly means that like you're going to see another step in that process of the USC Reggie Bush marriage or remarriage, as it were, being cemented. Like something there's definitely something afoot, and it's definitely appropriate for the school. Just kind of to kind of deviate on a similar track, not the same track, but a similar one. Like, you're going to see some Charles White tributes in the works for this year at USC. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Trojans handle Reggie Bush tributes and honors, and also balance that with Charles White tributes and honors in 2023.
Does anyone in the chat know who the other player would be to fill out those two to have accomplished the Heisman, the national championship, and the Super Bowl? Give it some thought. All right. Dun, dun, dun. I thought Howell is asking about the utilization of the tight end position and how that possibly differed from Oklahoma. Maybe we can add on how you expect it in the future, just kind of your take on this subject.
Yeah, so I mean, in 2022 at USC, Lincoln Riley had some elite tight ends at Oklahoma. He had guys who were more downfield threats in the passing game, like Spencer Rattler had Stogner before he transferred to South Carolina, and I believe he transferred back to
Yes, you did.
Oklahoma. Yeah, so you had some higher end, you had high end tight ends, who had that ability to stretch the field downfield. USC really didn't have that from the tight end spot in 2022. So it's not so much that he used tight ends differently. It's just he had different kinds of tight ends. He didn't have the same caliber of tight end. He didn't have the same skill set to work with. He usually used Lake McCree on underneath routes, drag routes, like against Notre Dame. If you remember early on that drive, like they'd slip him out into the short flat and you get the action going the other way. He'd pretend that he was blocking, but then he'd leak out. So the USC ran some very subtle, clever kinds of plays, short intermediate throws to tight ends. So like it didn't have the tight ends who would, go down the field. It didn't have a Gronk style tight end, to take the lid off down the field. So less about the usage being different. It was more of just Lincoln Riley is good at working with the specific skill set of a specific kind of player. This was something I learned from the Riley files and interviewing an Oklahoma insider, that Lincoln Riley is really good about taking what he has and working with it. He doesn't impose a style or an expectation on a player. He will size up the player and then determine, how do I use that player? Like Riley doesn't predetermine each year how he wants the roster to be, because he'll look at the roster and he'll say, all right, I have these different skill sets at the various position groups, O-line, running back, receiver. Oh, so I need to get this particular guy to blend in with the rest of my personnel as I have it. He doesn't predetermine the kind of personnel. He will look at, what he has available to him, and he tries to fit things in. And so that's really the key insight in terms of how Lincoln Riley not only uses tight ends, but uses any personnel group, any position group that he has on his offense.
Folks, if we don't have Matt Zemek, we don't have a USC show here every Monday night. So we appreciate Matt. Check out all of his work at Trojans Wire. And again, you can follow Matt. It's easy to see right there on Twitter, Matt Zemek on Twitter. And we'll be back here next Monday night, of course, to talk more USC football. And we're about 4 to 5 weeks away from spring practice. Bring your comments and questions. And again, bring 2 or 3 friends with you as well next Monday night at 8 Pacific time. All right, Matt, anything else we need to know from your side of the globe?
I think it's just worth noting for USC fans, in case you missed the news earlier today, not USC news, but like news for USC opponents. So Andy Ludwig is staying at Utah as offensive coordinator. So that means that Notre Dame will not get Andy Ludwig as offensive coordinator, and that Notre Dame offensive coordinator search, that's a really key thing. Like, this is the guy who's going to match wits with Alex Grinch when USC goes to South Bend in October with Sam Hartman there at quarterback for the Irish. So that Notre Dame offensive coordinator search, we're definitely interested in that. So Andy Ludwig will not go to South Bend. So that's one thing. The other thing is Notre Dame's longtime offensive line coach retired. And I know, Mark, that we had Brian Driscoll on, Notre Dame expert, and he loved that particular part of the coaching staff, in terms of recruiting and also developing offensive linemen. One could make the argument that Notre Dame's O-line coach vacancy is more important than the offensive coordinator vacancy. And I'm not going to just make that flat declaration, but I'm just saying you could make an argument that it's more important because given the style of play that Notre Dame has, Notre Dame is a more smash mouth style program than USC is. That's just a reality. So you could make the argument that that's the more important hire for Marcus Freeman right now. It'll be very interesting to see how Freeman fills both of those holes, with the O-line coach vacancy arguably being more important than coordinator. Both are very huge, but losing the veteran offensive line coach, that could turn out to be a bigger deal than a lot of people currently think. So USC's odds of winning in South Bend, I mean, hey, it's February, all right, but a little bit higher right now, and we'll see if they go down if Freeman makes some really astute hires at those positions.
Roger Dodger, you can let us know what the Valentine's Day holiday holds for you and Alex Grinch. And again, Tim reminding everyone he's left a lot of links there in the chat to make it easier for you to follow Matt on Twitter and at Trojans Wire. Matt, it's always a good time and always appreciate your insight. And we will hopefully do it again next week.
Absolutely. And of course, for all those who celebrate, happy Arizona Statehood Day, because that's what February 14th means to me, a native Arizonan. We came into existence as a state on February 14th, 1912. Ditat Deus, baby. God enriches. That's the Arizona State motto. So Arizona turns 111 on February 14th, 2023.
I can't prove it now. I was going to hold you up on the year, but that was going to be my guess, 1912. I was pretty confident on 1912. All right, very good. Right, Matt, thank you.
Third grade education comes through again.
Absolutely. There it is.
We actually retained a few things.
Yes, a lot of dates in mind, of course. Yes. All right, Matt, thank you so much as always.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone for watching The Voice of College Football. Really appreciate it.